bari biyo ken kontan batale bari inatal pour kanna bullo ko jibe
ito kontan tale makura bari ala ya lonte man kontan de makura kana nyina ko teninte belbe tuba dudu la kili ngoto
ngoto nyalti kay
ngokko di baka to ngokina njang pour yena dula dada ni tata na dula to makura ala ya lon njuso malla ama hani futa dula din anu birite loro commencé woni bitema ama hani me
non ama me to nyalom
ke bara fonye mune muy la kulloti
ndela kullu balu walti
baluo way fo baluo ko loro fanankele
ikal loro fanankele
nyin kunne soniyata ta www.baluo.com anim baluo isela bulloran jorangol be sang anila kudula asatare mambata jorangol membu ko cementol kenyo babarol nil peruol woni nga nyon jamal ta baluo.com yin jorangol be sang ila dinkira bado adungite batala je anim baluo ifangole marate la kudula.
Islamic microfinance is becoming an increasingly popular mechanism for poverty alleviation, especially for developing countries around the world. This microfinance service adheres to the principles of Islam as a form of social responsibility. Yonna Islamic Microfinance is the Islamic microfinance of choice in the Gambia, trustworthy and reliable. At Yonna Islamic Microfinance, we provide savings products, current accounts, financing products in conformity with Islam. In addition, Yonna Islamic Microfinance also offers local and international remittances, takaful fund, management of zakat, management of awqaf, trading and investment, and building of strategic partnerships to bring financial services to the doorstep of the poor with donor projects, madrasas, youth organizations, women groups, and farmer organizations. Make a choice with Yonna Islamic Microfinance today. For more information on Yonna Islamic Microfinance, call 377-2151 or 9832-151 or visit Yonna head office at Tipa Garage, Bakote, or visit any Yonna branch located countrywide near you.
Distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we'll have an historic event. Historic in the sense that we are going to talk about a figure who is recognized not only by Gambians but by the entire world as one of the greatest sons and greatest leaders of Africa since independence. And that person is the late President of the Republic, Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. You may have seen copies of the program for tonight. It's very simple. We'll start with opening remarks by the chairman of Kaira Klo. And our next speaker will be the former Vice President, Bakary Darboe, who will give anecdotes of his encounter with Sir Dawda. These are just going to be light-hearted reflections of what Sir Dawda was like and how it was like to live with him. Then we'll go on to the next speaker who would give a brief rundown of activities that Kaira Klo has been engaged in the last year, which is the centenary year of the birth of Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. And then we'll have the guest speaker to round up our program tonight. Without wasting much time, I say a big welcome to everybody and invite the chairman, the Venerable Lawyer Ba, His Excellency Almami Fandin Tal.
It's a great honor for me personally to be asked to lead the efforts of reviving the memories and the rich leadership legacy that Sir Dawda has given our nation. It's a great honor because all the members of our Board of Trustees are far more distinguished than I am. They are far more experienced than I am. I'm probably among the youngest of the founding fathers and founding mothers of Kairaba. So we are very pleased this evening that Gambians, very, very distinguished Gambians, have chosen to share part of their evening with us to remember perhaps our greatest leader since independence. We are very pleased that the call of Kairaba has been heard by really very, very distinguished Gambians, and particularly we are pleased that the People's Republic of China's embassy in the Gambia have done us the honor of attending the Centenary inaugural lecture. My task is just to talk very briefly about Kairaba, how it started, and what our objectives are really. We established Kairaba in 2022, in November of 2022. Following the proper registration as a company limited by guarantee. We did that deliberately because we did not want it to become like any of those foundations that engages in mere idolization or mere gestures. We established it principally to learn the leadership legacy, especially when it comes to conservation, what Sir Dawda was really about. The Banjul Declaration is our charter, and from that declaration, Sir Dawda says this word, that the care for the environment is everybody's concern. Everybody's concern. So it's an inclusive organization, principally. Secondly, we also wanted to claim the legacy, not as blood children of Sir Dawda, but as intellectual heirs, that public life could be very, very rewarding. Public life could be very inclusive. I remember in 1984, when Sir Dawda turned 60, I was a very young teenager, still consider myself very young. We had his birthday musical requests. Then we only had Radio Gambia. And for the first time, for a young teenager like me who was curious about a lot of things, when the radio broadcaster asked him, which song would you like for us to play for you on your birthday? Sir Dawda said that there is this Russian composer called Tchaikovsky, and his musical score in D minor, I mean, the level of sophistication that such a choice conveyed to young teenagers was something else. It was from that time that we started looking at someone like me, looking at Sir Dawda as really a modern man, a man of the world, a man of global dimensions. I recall this incident because when I went to university, my contemporaries, Gambians, we all remember that conversation of Sir Dawda on radio. And we started listening to classical music and started appreciating the beauty of Tchaikovsky's music. So for a man of that temperament, for a leader of that stature, it would be unforgivable that all his works, all the great things he has done for this country should be forgotten in a relatively short period of time after his passing. This is why Kairaba was formed, that we have a heritage upon which we can build a thriving, not only democratic and just society, but a society that is at peace with nature, a society that is able to put its ideas in front of the world, the philosophy of Tacito, the ideas of self-reliance and plurality in governance, in democracy. These are all things that Dawda taught us so well. And we felt this legacy should be a part and parcel of the discussions. I know my brother, Mr. Anes Obi, will talk a little bit about the activities, but I thought I would take this opportunity to have my own personal reminiscences about Dawda and why we think the legacy must be claimed by all Gambians. I remember some years ago when I was the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, he came very quietly to the trade fair we had at the stadium. And he was going around, people were cheering him, people were very warm to him. So I walked to him and I said, Dawda, I have to tell you a story. I don't know whether you remember this story. Some years ago, like 35 years ago, I came to your office as a youth leader from Banjul, and we were talking about helping with the cleaning up of Banjul. We had these barrels, former barrels that contain oil. We cut it into two and we made it into dustbins. He said, is that Almami? I said, yes, Dawda. He said, well, I remember you because my father's name was also Almami. So we have very, very vivid memories of Dawda, his speech, his general geniality, and the sophistication I mentioned. I think we would do very well if we can teach our own children some of those values, because they are enduring values, they are meaningful values. The last story is my own encounter with the Banjul Declaration. In 1977, I was in primary school, in Winley Primary School, and I remember Mrs. Yonna was our principal. She had the Banjul Declaration in her office. And then, you know, you are just learning your ABCs. But the picture of the Banjul Declaration, really, very fascinating. Very fascinating. And you would go, when you go to her office, normally for being a recalcitrant pupil, you would be taken there for some kind of punishment. But you will go and then you will see the Banjul Declaration and you would keep looking at it. It was only years later that we realized how important it is. And during this centenary year, we have met a cross-section of Gambians and presented it to them. And invariably, almost everybody of a certain generation will tell you about the fauna and flora. If you say Banjul Declaration, these two words are remembered there. So we feel on a day like this, it's good to personalize the encounter with Dawda in the hope that other memories would be stirred.
Mami Fandintal, he is the chairman of the Kairaba Conservation and Leadership Organization. We call it Kaira Club for short. Indeed, Dawda was everything to everybody. He is remembered not only because he was a Gambian president, but because of the things he stood for. And one of them was this Banjul Declaration, which you all see behind me. He was talking about the environment 47 years ago, and nobody took notice of it. But today, we all know what is happening in the world and how communities are suffering because of the degradation of the environment. I will now call on our next speaker, His Excellency Bakary Darboe, who was Vice President, Minister of Finance, Minister of various ministries during Dawda's time.
Following in your footsteps, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of all the distinguished guests here, both on the high table and in the main hall, and say how much I feel honored by your organization to associate me with today's event, which by the look of it is meant to be, and I'm sure it will turn out to be a happy event. I thank you particularly also for the courtesy with which you received me and even upgraded me by bringing me to sit on the high table here. You asked me, and I'm happy to oblige, to say a few words about Dawda's life, but you gave me only 10 minutes. That is quite a challenge. There have been so much about Dawda's life, but I did get it when you made the introduction that you wanted me to actually just limit myself to a few anecdotes to illustrate an aspect to the passing of Dawda, particularly his sense of humor. And I'm very happy that you have just that area to cover. But before I do so, let me congratulate the Kairaba Conservation and Leadership organization that you are, Kairaba for short. First, on the initiative you've taken to dedicate yourself to the perpetuation and the promotion of an aspect of Dawda's legacy relating to the important area of environment, particularly conservation, in order to ensure or guarantee us a sustainable future. I think, as somebody said, there is a lot to Dawda's leadership, not even his entire personality, but his leadership of the country, but in particular his efforts in the area of conservation, I think, constitute a major strand in the legacy he left behind. That as far back as 1977, a leadership, that meaning himself and his government, could see the need to draw attention of the country people to the issue and the challenges to our environment, to the point of issuing the celebrated Banjul Declaration, I think speaks a lot about the far-sightedness which marked his leadership. And it is a matter of regret that somewhere down the line, perhaps the country and the leadership began to be a bit slack about conserving our environment, to the point that the Gambia becomes, rightly or wrongly, accused of taking part in damaging the environment, not only in the Gambia, but even in neighboring Senegal. That shows this kind of decline that the country took in the most important area of Dawda's legacy. I now feel very happy that some Gambians on their own have come forward to dedicate themselves, not only to make better known the ideas of the environment and the need for its protection, but to commit their own efforts. And I think it's a bright example, not only for all other Gambians, but also for the Gambian leadership to encourage. Because time has shown, since 1977, that the issues of environment have become really major challenges to our very survival as people on this earth here. So that I think it's a very good initiative you're taking, and I'd like to congratulate you and recommend your case to Gambians, as I said, both in the government and outside of government, because it's for all Gambians. Now, talking about the man, Sir Dawda, as I said, I'm relieved that you asked me only to talk about one aspect of his life and life as a public figure, because somebody who had been in public life for several decades, first as a civil servant, later on as an active politician, rising through the ranks from member of parliament to minister or to president, and for many years. There is quite a lot to be said. But that leads a lot of people, when they cast their minds back on Sir Dawda, to simply to tend to remember only what there was to him in terms of what he is able to perform on the job. But that can lead people to overlook the fact that he was also a human being. And the sense of humor, his sense of humor, which you asked me to reminisce on, forms part of his personality as a human being. It has been a privilege for me to have been associated with him from the work point of view. And I will try to remember one or two incidents, including demonstration on his part of a sense of humor in situations that arose. Maybe the first, in terms of going back in time, was when I was commissioner. They called them divisional commissioner in Caravan, and I had the privilege of hosting Sir Dawda on one of his frequent tours in the countryside. It wasn't the kind of grand meet the farmers tour. It was I remember clearly, it was just a visit he paid to Georgetown, and on his way back, it was planned by the party for him to address a rally in Farafenye. And as such, the program provided for him to leave Georgetown, come to Farafenye, early in the morning, come to Farafenye. But since he was going to have the morning free, he had agreed to make a detour somewhere along the line to go and try to address a particular issue, which was a party issue. And as commissioner, we went to the border between the Kerawan division and Makati division. I went to receive him from there. I came with him in his vehicle. He was always that considerate, that kind enough on such occasions to say I should join him in his vehicle. I mean, he did it for all commissioners anyway. So at the level of Ngien Sanjal, the community called Ngien Sanjal, I remember we stopped there because there was this patriarch called Alhaji Modu Motagei, a remarkable community leader, was a very close personal friend of Sir Dawda. I found out that their relationship dated back to a period that Sir Dawda worked as a veterinary officer, because Modu Mata was a big cattle farmer. So we stopped there and spent some time with him there. And the community was very delighted, very excited as usual to see Sir Dawda. But from there we headed for Bambali, where we had to have this confrontation meeting. Some issue had arisen between members of the communities around that area over a number of issues, but it spilled over into the party, and it was threatening the unity of the constituency party. So Sir Dawda found it necessary to stop over. He was convinced, and he said he would stop over and talk to them. But the meeting turned out to be very rowdy, very difficult to control. It was several factions came, and even to allow them to speak their piece and allow the other side to speak their piece and get Sir Dawda to speak, it became a problem to maintain law and order. So I recall, and this is the little joke about Sir Dawda, but it brought out a lot about his sense of humor, but also his experience and knowledge of local population. When it became very difficult for the chair of the meeting to get the feuding parties to allow even somebody else to speak, he rose up to his feet. Sadauda rose up to his feet. Not at the moment when he was formally called, but he rose up to his feet as a way of really getting some quiet, peace and quiet. And when they achieved quietness, he said, addressing the two factions, he said to them in Manding that what you have said, I have listened to it. Contrary to the impression you have that I haven't heard your version, I've heard what you've had to say, I even have heard what you haven't said. Then he turned to the other group and said to them, look, what you have said, I listened to it very well, I heard it. What you left behind, I heard that also. And it had a magical effect of diffusing tension. There had been so much tension, and I was personally even thinking that our meeting was going to fail. But he was able to diffuse tension and managed to get their attention to be able to deliver what he had by way of advice. And as I said, it's a sense of humor which was not aggressive, not harsh, but more in line with his own gentle nature. Was strong on wit and strong on subtlety. So he put this joke in a very subtle way, but still conveyed a very strong message across, and it worked very well. And I, from that day, came away with a lot of respect for the kind of experience he had in dealing with human beings. I can say a lot more about that incident, but I'll give you another one. This one, I think you have to go back to 1982 or thereabouts. As a country, we were at the time in very bad terms with Colonel Gaddafi. If you say 81 in this country, most of you will remember Kukoi. There was a period when, even before Kukoi, we had started as a country to have some problems with meddlesomeness by Gaddafi in our internal affairs, leading us to a point where I think we even broke relations. with them. Yes, we even broke relations, diplomatic relations with them. And it wasn't only the Gambia, neighboring countries. In 1979, when as ambassador to Dhaka, I presented my letters of credence to President Senghor. I remember very well, after the ceremony part, the practice was that he would withdraw into a side office and would have a chat with. And I remember he was the first who told me, speaking to me in his very heavy Serer accent, he said to me, Wahal Jawara ne, Gaddafi. Gaddafi is somebody to be careful of, something to that effect. But that was the kind of relationship Gaddafi had with countries like ours. And then on top of it, we had Kukoi. And all that, at the time, we felt as a government about Gaddafi and what he was up to. So relations were broken off. But then we got to a stage where we started having reports that Gambians, just like some Senegalese, were being recruited and taken to Guinea and Libya, and they were receiving military training, which all looked very suspicious for somebody who's been accused of being subversive. For that kind of story to come, and there was truth in it, because I think some of you will remember Mansour Njai, broadcaster at the Radio Gambia. I mean, at the time, the story was that he was acting as an agent for Khalifa Niasse, Ahmed Khalifa Niasse, who's still alive, who was also involved in recruiting Gambians going there. So we took note of it. The government took note of it, and as usual in that kind of situation, the police, through their intelligence agency, had their eyes on who were going there, because we didn't have a law or power to stop Gambians from going there. But of course, anything we could do administratively to discourage Gambians from going, we did it. For instance, if you had applied then for a passport saying you want to go to Libya, most likely you wouldn't get it quickly. So anyway, that was the situation. We had that kind of cold relations with Libya. And the police intelligence people doing their job with zeal, the usual zeal, took it upon themselves to try to monitor the presence or passage of Gambians through Libya. I don't know how they did it, but they were getting. Periodically, they'll send a report, say, over the past 30 days, Gambian so-and-so, Gambian so-and-so was seen in Libya. So we will look at it. From what I got to know about Dawda, he personally didn't take that very, very seriously. But anyway, we had to go through receiving that report and read it and take note of it. And in any case, nothing very serious came out. But I remember one afternoon I was in his office. I was then his vice president. I was no longer commissioner. I was in his office and to discuss some matter. We went through that discussion, concluded it, and we got to a stage where I was just waiting for him to say, well, I release you, go, or something like that. But as I noticed he was sitting behind his desk and I was in front of him. I noticed he was very absorbed. He had some document, he was looking at it, absorbed. So I kept quiet, gave him time. Then at one point I saw him say, he sort of smiled and said to me, look, but he said, but let me, you take the list, you read it for yourself. So I took the list. It was a short list, about 7, 8, and some Gambian names, who I didn't know. He said to me, what sense do you make out of this? I said, well, this looks like the kind of report we get from the police. He said, yes, but what about the names? Do you know them? I said, no. Then he said, okay, let me have it back. I gave him back, and he checked and spotted the actual number against a particular name and handed it back. I said, look at number 4. So I looked at number 4. I now don't remember, but that was a Jawara. The surname was Jawara, something Jawara. I said, well, this is Jawara. He said to me, this is Basadi's son. Basadi was his late brother, his older brother. But people, Lady Chila, Basadi was a character of his own. So when he said it, I personally felt a bit embarrassed, and I expected that he also might be having some feeling of embarrassment. Then I said, well, but this, I got to sort of grumble underneath. He said to me, Bakary, Basadi, winning Gaddafi man diplomatic relations. He said the severing of links between Gambia and Libya, we as government decided it on behalf of the 1 million Gambians, but not Basadi. Basadi was not affected by that. Again, it shows another witty side to his sense of it. He can make it at his own expense, but also say it in such a way that he explains the situation profoundly. For having known Basadi at the time, what that was telling me was that, well, look, there's nothing we can do about it because nobody can make Basadi change his mind. So that was another example. If I have time, I'll give you one more. One more. And this one, which one can I think of now? Yes. I think, I don't know, I'm not clear in my mind which one, but there was this old Marabout man, not old, but more venerable Marabout, who used to be called Sheikh Yaqub from Mauritania. And a good number of Muslims are Qadriya. These are the Qadriya sect. And a lot of them adopt these people in Mauritania as their guides, religious guides. Evidence of it is that many prominent families have got at least one son named Sharif, and that always means they belong to that sect. So this, at this particular point in time, it was in the 80s again, it was reported that it was in the practice during the dry season for them to come and tour their disciples. But it's also an occasion when the disciples are supposed to give adia. So this man paid a visit and he was staying with my own uncle, Sanjali Bojang in Kembuje. And there were reports coming that, people were going in droves to Sanjay, to the place to visit to get prayers and get some money, blah, blah, blah. Then one morning, Sada called me, said, look, your uncle has sent a message asking for me to give an appointment to the sheriff, the sheikh. So you come and join me. So after a short while, the delegation arrived, big delegation. The sheriff himself with his followers, and the other hosts, Gambian personalities. I remember a lot of them. Fabala Kanute, Alaji Malang, a lot of them came. The whole sitting room was full. And the point I'm trying to bring, Sadara is not a fanatic. Not only is not a fanatic, but he's also one who is very conscious of the fact that what he owes, what he has, or what he owes it to Gambian people above anything else. When this delegation came, we sat down and Sanjali, my uncle, who was a man of many seasons, took the floor and said, very flowery speech. This man has come from time immemorial. These people are our guides, and they've come, and blah, blah, a lot of talk. And introduced him and said how right it was that Sadar allowed him to come to be received. And then somebody else spoke, then the Khalif spoke through an interpreter. He said a lot of things, but the point I want to touch on is that he pleaded with Sadar for food, arguing that his talibas back home, they have a lot of talibas, and that there was drought in Mauritania, and that he pleaded for that in a very passionate way. And Sadar was very calm. He just kept quiet, listened. And when he finished, I said a few other things, and Sadar Stone came to me. He welcomed him. He said, yes, I do recognize that it's a long historic relationship of disciple and guide between you and us. It's good that you've come, or people are welcome. And he said all the nice things, perfect diplomat. But he said nothing about the food. He said nothing about the food. So when it was ready, almost saying, inviting them to say Fatiha, go, or something like that, somebody sprang from the crowd. What about the food? Said, what about the food? What about the food? What about the food? Because Sadar was displeased. But he's not the type who, as you know, can easily show his anger. But he just draw his face and get very quiet. Until the man spoke and protested that you don't ignore such a request coming from this man. You must do something. So I just kept quiet, looking at him. Then, after a while, the man was asked to sit down, because that was not the way he should talk. Then Sadar then said to the interpreter to tell the man, to the sheikh, that yes, he sympathized with him for needing money for feeding, needing food to go and feed his large school of talibas, but that this phenomenon that led to food shortage is also what affected us here in the Gambia here. In very gentle but very clear words. And that what little we have really is for his talibas who are here in the Gambia. And again, you could see this fellow agitating. I don't even want to mention his name here. And he was agitating. He said, no. If Sadara feels the government should not give him, he should tell us. We are businessmen. We can give some money. Sadara wasn't impressed at all. But those shows you the kind of leader he was. Not easily carried away by this kind of sentiment, and never made to lose sight of the fact that his first consideration should be the people, his own people. That was a kind of person I remember him being. As I said, I have tried very much to keep myself to just one aspect, which brought out his personality in terms of his sense of humor. One that is marked by subtlety and wit, which I have seen him use to diffuse tensions and sometimes in trouble, or to answer questions to people in a manner which is very effective without offending them. That much I know about Sir Dawda. He's a great person, a great leader, and I think we have it as a duty and obligation to remember him, to celebrate his life, now and always. And what you, Cairo Klo, have set yourself doing is one concrete way of not only celebrating his life, but also working, contributing to perpetuating legacy of an issue which is of extreme importance, conservation. I therefore want to congratulate you once more and thank you for allowing me to say a few words.
I'll now call on Dr. Anes Obi to say a few words of what Cairo Klo has been doing in this centenary year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to stand on the existing protocols that have been established, but please allow me to appreciate everybody on the high table and everybody in this hall. I see a lot of distinguished kotos and aunties and uncles who are present here. You are most welcome. But Mr. Chairman, I cannot start by not recognizing my boss at the Ecowas Commission, His Excellency Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, the president of the Ecowas Commission, until I retired 2022, was my boss and still continues to lead this regional organization to transform it from an ECOWAS of state to an ECOWAS of people, the 2050 vision, and he is doing marvelously well. You are welcome, sir. Without wasting much time, I'll be giving a quick rundown on the activities of the centenary year. If our dear leader, Sir Dawda, was alive, he would have been 100 years this year. So that's why we call it centenary year. We are observing his and celebrating his legacy. In November 2022, the ECOWAS Commission recognized Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara as one of the most consequential leaders of the sub-region and the greatest champion of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And that under his leadership as chairman of ECOWAS 1989 to 1990 and 1991 to 1992, he worked tirelessly to address the humanitarian disasters in Liberia and Sierra Leone. The Kairaba Conservation and Leadership Organization, Cairo Klo for short, founded in November 2022 as a company limited by guarantee. Our mission, as was said by earlier speakers, is to promote the conservation vision expressed in the Banjul Declaration of 1977 and to raise awareness about the need for environmental stewardship amongst school children and the greater Gambian population and the population of the world. Number two, to take effective grassroots actions to combat climate change through conservation and sustainable biodiversity management. And the third objective or mission is to advocate for climate justice and promote gender-inclusive climate policies and action. These three objectives are very laudable and stand in tandem with the Banjul Declaration of 1977, which was promulgated by our dear leader, His Excellency Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. Sir Dawda, more than any African leader of his generation, was an avid conservationist and raised awareness about environmental protection and the abiding duty of care we all owe to future generations to conserve the flora and fauna inherited from our great African heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Dawda's philosophy of tacito, which is self-reliance, challenges us to work together to achieve national greatness regardless of ethnicity, religion, or political party affiliation. With the Banjul Declaration of 1977, Sir Dawda inspired Gambians and people around the world with his conservation vision and philosophy of self-reliance. During his time in office, President Jawara molded generations of Gambians to serve our nation and humanity selflessly. Therefore, on May 16, 2024, Kaira Cloak formally commemorated the 100th anniversary of the birth of the first president of the Gambia, His Excellency Alhaji Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. The year-long celebrations comprise several activities conducted by Kaira Cloak. Number one, reprinting and distribution of the Banjul Declaration of 1977 to raise awareness about Sir Dawda's conservation legacy. The declaration has been distributed to both public and private individuals in this country, and the next level would be to distribute it to all the schools in this country. Number two, earlier in the year, there was a symposium on the circular economy, waste management and opportunities for transformation. This was a highly successful symposium where we had government represented through the National Environment Agency, the municipalities of KMC, civil society organizations, and other individuals participated. And our key recommendation to government is to have a working group on the circular economy, which would help to process all the waste that we generate from our homes, our offices, our businesses, into organic produce, which can be used to enhance our agriculture and livelihood. There were roundtable television discussions on Sir Dawda's leadership legacy, which covered various aspects and interventions of his legacy in the Gambia, in the region, and the world at large. Please remember, Sir Dawda was a goodwill ambassador. He was identified by the OIC to intervene in the Iraq-Iran conflict many years ago. And again, he made Gambia and Gambians proud. We also celebrated the Kairaba Conservation and Climate Action Week. During this week, we had tree planting ceremonies at the National Assembly just by Gambia High School in Banjul. We also had tree planting ceremonies here in the Kairaba International Conference Center. In addition to that, there was also a tree planting ceremony by Gambian women in leadership, in positions of responsibility, that was led by the current First Lady and also our dear mother, Her Excellency Lady Chilel Jawara, which was held at the Makati Square, and with the active support of the Mayor of Banjul, who also was part and parcel of the engagement. In moving forward, we, as a body, and we need your support for these interventions, we want to establish the D.K. Jawara Africa Center for Climate Justice. Again, we count on the support of the government through His Excellency President Adama Barrow and his Minister of Justice present here, and also all other partners interested in the issues of climate change and climate justice. We have successfully today launched the Dawda Kairaba Jawara Pan-African Lecture Series, and it is a singular honor for us to have the first lecture series delivered by a distinguished Gambian and a son of the soil, His Excellency Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, President of the Ecowas Commission, who is doing a fantastic job in our sub-region. In addition to that, we would want to establish the Dawda Kairaba Jawara Centennial Medal of Excellence, which would be given out to people who have, through their actions, their interventions, have or continue to contribute towards maintaining vision of Dawda as expressed in the Banjul Declaration of 1997. The centenary celebration, before I conclude, we are also working with the British High Commission, the Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Security of the Gambia to revive the Botanical Garden in Bakary. For all these interventions, we cannot do it alone. We seek the support of the government, of the private sector, of well-intentioned Gambians, of international organizations and bodies like ECOWAS, UNEP, FAO, and the rest of them. The centenary celebration will culminate with the inaugural Dawda Kairaba Jawara Pan-African Lecture, which shall be delivered in the Gambia by the eminent African diplomat and President of the ECOWAS Commission, His Excellency Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, on the topic, Dawda Kairaba Jawara, the Diplomat. In his lecture, Dr. Touray will explore Dawda's leadership in regional peace and security, as well as President Jawara's immense contribution to the institutionalization of democracy, human rights, and good governance in the Gambia and on the African continent as a whole. I thank you for your kind attention.
We thank you very much. Dr. Obi also mentioned a few things that Kaira Klo is planning to do. He talked about the botanical gardens in Bakary. This is a project we have consulted with the British Embassy and the other local government agencies like the Ministry of Agriculture, the National Environment Agency, and the whole lot of them. We will work in collaboration with these organizations to ensure that the botanical gardens come up to speed and would be useful to not only students, but also would be of interest for tourists and thereby be a little income-earning project for the Gambia government. Another big project which we have in mind, Kaira Klo, is to establish the Dawda Kairaba Endowment Fund. I have a gentleman here, Dr. Nyambi Touray, who has worked in the same field as Dawda, the field of veterinary science. And if we ask him to come here, I'm sure there are many anecdotes he can give about Dawda and his time with him in that field. But we discussed this matter with the University of the Gambia, and they say this could be the stepping stone for the establishment of a veterinary school at the university. But as I say, it's in its very early stages, but these are things that we're thinking about, and Kaira Klo will need your support to realize these objectives. Our next speaker is going to be the main speaker for the evening, His Excellency Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, sorry. I welcome all of you to this inaugural Dawda Jawara Pan-African lecture series. My task this evening and right now is simple. It is to tell you who our invited guest speaker is and ultimately to invite him to the podium. Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, an illustrious Gambian, was born in Farafenni on November 5th, 1965. He received his first degree in, that's the Bachelor of Arts in Literature and Linguistics in 1987, and graduated 7 years later in 1994 with a PhD in International Relations at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva. One of the first Gambian career diplomats, Dr. Touray served as permanent representative to the United Nations for a year prior to being appointed Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs from March 2008 to September 2009. Before all this, Dr. Omar Alieu Touray was the liaison officer for the World Indigenous Organization, and at the UN office in Geneva from September 1993 to December 1994. At that time, he was a consultant at the International Labour Office in Geneva. In July 1995, Dr. Touray briefly served as Senior Assistant Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs before becoming the first secretary at the Embassy in Brussels and the World Trade Organization in 1995. In mid-1996, he was elevated to the post of Counselor and Head of Chancery in Brussels, where he remained until April 2002, when he was promoted to Ambassador to Ethiopia with concurrent accreditation as permanent representative to the United Nations, the African Union, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and the United Nations Environment Program at the same time. Dr. Touray served as Gambia's permanent representative to the United Nations in September 2007, before becoming Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs on the 19th of March 2008. After his tenure as Foreign Minister, Dr. Omar Alieu Touray gained employment with the Islamic Development Bank in Ivory Coast and in Saudi Arabia. On October 2021, Dr. Touray was unanimously appointed as the new president of the ECOWAS Commission for a period of 4 years, 2022 to 2026. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the singular honor to invite our distinguished Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, President of the ECOWAS Commission, to deliver the inaugural lecture in the Dawda Kairaba Jawara Pan-African Lecture Series on the topic Dawda, the Diplomat.
Your Excellency, Mama Chilel Jawara, Your Excellency Bakary Darboe, former Vice President, Your Excellency Dawda Honorable Dawda, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Gambia, representing His Excellency President Adama Barrow, Head of State of the Gambia. Excellencies, Mr. Tal, the chairperson of the Kaira Club, trustees of Kaira Club, Excellencies, ambassadors, permanent representatives, permanent secretaries, diplomats, senior government officials, all protocols duly observed.
It's been a while. It's been almost a year since I've been in touch with Kaira Klo about this talk. I would rather call it a talk than a lecture, because I believe it is more of a mark of confidence on the part of the Kaira Klo to invite somebody with no classroom experience to give an inaugural lecture. And I'm saying this conscious of the presence of full professors in the house. I see Dr. Sen here, and I also see diplomats about whom I'll be talking. So really, I think when I initially ran away from the invitation, I should have kept running away, because I'll be talking about things that people who actually took part in those processes are here with us, and I feel honored really to see many of them. I see ambassadors, His Excellency Bolonsonko is here, His Excellency William Juf is here, His Excellency Yusuf Akai is here. So I think talking about the Gambia's diplomacy, I'll be just reminding those diplomats about the various subjects I wanted to cover. And of course, His Excellency himself, Bakary Darboe, a veteran diplomat. So really, it is not an easy task, but we can make it very easy. Just let us assume that we're just reminding ourselves about incidents you lived. Some of us just picked them up through academic work, through research, but you were the actual actors. So it's a question of reminding ourselves of those. I know Honorable Minister Bolonsonko and William Juf still mad with me for reasons I wouldn't disclose here, because I came as a researcher and I left with sufficient data, not only for, and I left with sufficient data. I'll just stop there. But Excellencies, indeed, I should really express my appreciation and gratitude to the organizers of this event for inviting me to kick off this series of lectures on Sir Dawda. Really an exceptional person, a patriot, a leader, and an international statesman, a diplomat, whom we all continue to look up to. I did not have the privilege to work under Sir Dawda. I came to Foreign Service in 1995, and that was a year, almost a year after he had left office. But I have had the privilege to interact with people Sir Dawda really led. I interacted with the ministers, I interacted with the permanent secretaries, ambassadors, and senior government officials. I also had the privilege to consult primary material on the Gambia's relations, external relations, that Sir Dawda really oversaw. And those engagements and consultations gave me sufficient evidence for the thesis I was able to advance in my study on the Gambia's foreign policy. And I'm glad Dr. Sen is here. He was the first reviewer of my book on the Gambia's foreign policy, and I'm most grateful. So the question that I want to ask is, what is the research finding that I want to share with you today? Well, the title of the presentation is Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara, the Diplomat. And that is for a reason. First, Sir Dawda was the primary and the principal diplomat from the early 60s up to the end of his rule in July 1994. He remained a constant factor behind the Gambia's foreign policy, even though he had never been the country's foreign minister himself. nor did he seek to combine the presidency with the foreign ministry. Yet Dawda's influence on the Gambia's foreign policy cannot be overstressed. He nominated the Minister of External Affairs and was empowered by the Constitution to nominate the Gambia's principal representatives overseas. Therefore, up to 1994, the Gambia's foreign policy reflected President Jawara's personality, beliefs, and stance on national and international affairs. The question, therefore, is, who is Dawda Jawara? In his book, Kairaba, Dawda himself speaks at length about his childhood, his early life, political career, and life as a former president. And a number of works on the Gambia have also covered Dawda's worldview. Therefore, in my view, there's no need to rehash some of those, but what we can retain from those accounts is that Dawda was a rational leader. He was popular, shrewd, pragmatic, realistic, or realist, not in the theoretical sense of the word, but a realistic person. And I think when I say a realist, students of international relations would appreciate what I'm trying to say, the hawkish tendency. But Dawda is a realist in the common sense of the word. Dawda is also very pragmatic and moderate, a peacemaker and a pioneer at the same time. Dawda's rationality was summed up by one of his English associates, who described Jawara as being more scientific than political. I quote him, and he says, Dawda wants to look at all the facts and then comes to his conclusion as if he were solving an equation. As for his popularity, this was attributed to both his political style as well as to the hundreds of people, if not millions of people he knew during his years as a veterinary officer. Well, I'll say hundreds of people because as a veterinary officer, then we were less than 500,000, so he could only know so many in the country. So he himself was quoted as saying once, "There is not a cow in the country that does not know me." So I can go on and cite examples of Dawda's status, Dawda's realism. For example, Alan Rake, a renowned commentator on African affairs, summed up Dawda's shrewdness in the following terms. And I quote, he has followed the constitutional convention of multi-party system, abiding by the rule of law, although he had been astute enough as a politician to win successive democratic elections. President Jawara's pragmatism and realistic approach to state affairs was best captured in his own statement to the nation on the occasion of the Gambia's attainment of independence. Dawda told his countrymen, "No one has to tell us we are Africa's smallest and poorest nation. We are very conscious that the task that lies before us is formidable. And this being so, we are the more determined to strive relentlessly to overcome the difficulties that make the task so considerable. Freedom," Dawda said, "will not bring miracles." Our intention in this talk, therefore, is to go beyond stating Dawda's qualities I think we can all keep on stating them. But what I thought would be a good value addition is to demonstrate those qualities as they relate to the Gambia's foreign relations. To do that, I have chosen some foreign policy events, episodes, and processes that shed light on Sir Dawda as a rational, pragmatic nationalist, a Pan-Africanist, a pioneer peacemaker, and a champion of human rights. I have chosen 5 episodes, events, and processes for this purpose. First, I thought we should jointly reflect on the Gambia's diplomacy in the immediate post-independence years. This will bring us closer to, this will allow us to have a close assessment of our relations with Senegal. It will also give us an insight into our engagement in multilateral diplomacy, as well as in economic diplomacy. I know time is not there, but another area we thought we could also reflect on is the Gambia's role in the Commonwealth and the OAU in those formative periods. We should also quickly look at the Gambia's role in ECOWAS intervention in Liberia, which, as one of the speakers has indicated, has set the stage for the peace support operations that ECOWAS and indeed African Union have embarked upon in recent years. The Gambia's role in the institutionalization of human rights, Dr. Obi has put an emphasis on this, and this I thought we should just quickly look at before we conclude with a quick look at the Gambia's policy towards independence movements within the continent. I must hasten to recognize that the risks associated with such an approach can be considerable. First, one such risk is the potential charge of reading into the evidence rather than reading out of the evidence. The attribution of multi-causality is another pitfall we are mindful about. And finally, a presentation of this nature cannot be exhaustive, and this may constitute a source of frustration for some readers or listeners who may be expecting topics that have been excluded. Now, if we start with the first point, that is the Gambia's policy, foreign policy during the immediate post-independence period. Not only was the country, or not only did we have small territory, 11,000 square kilometers, a population of 300,000 at independence, a GDP of £9 million, a country with so many difficult attributes would certainly be confronted with one thing, and that is viability. That was the key issue that confronted the Gambia at independence, viability. How can a country with 11,000 square kilometers, 300,000 people, no army, small workforce, how can a country of that nature survive? So this was a major question, and it led to a number of measures were taken, not only by the Gambian authorities, but by the international community as a whole. The UN, for example, commissioned a report to study the Gambia's independence prospects and what possibilities would be there in terms of our relations with Senegal. The report outlined three alternatives. The first was the full integration of the Gambia as the 8th Senegalese or Senegambian province. The second was a Senegambian federation in which the power of the federal government would be limited to defense and overseas representation, with complete autonomy in other aspects of the federated states. The third was the establishment of a Senegambian entente, where both states would remain fully sovereign. For Sir Dawda, the first option was unacceptable and was not to be entertained. Instead, Sir Dawda put forward proposals for political relations that were very similar to the third alternative. This too was not acceptable to Senegal. Indeed, President Jawara's reaction to the UN reports and the various proposals underscore his nationalistic credentials. I did say that Sir Dawda, from the various accounts, we know that he was a nationalist. And here is a full demonstration of Sir Dawda as a nationalist leader. He refused to accept any arrangement that would impinge on the Gambia's sovereignty and the Gambia's independence. The Gambia's viability for Sir Dawda was seen to lie not in a merger with Senegal, but in Dakar's goodwill and willingness not only to respect the Gambia's territorial integrity, but also to assume the country's external security. Thus, for Sir Dawda, the Gambia's viability would rest on two conditions alone: security, consisting in the territorial integrity of the country, and a strong economy. These two objectives became the key foreign policy objectives of Sir Dawda's government throughout his rule. I say two foreign policy objectives. I am not saying the only foreign policy objectives. In a minute we will see why. So, security and socio-economic development. These were the key foreign policy objectives of Sir Dawda's government. There is a third one, which I'll come to in a minute. So, Sir Dawda pursued these objectives, A, by building solid relations with Senegal, and from my interpretation of our relations with Senegal, certainly a lot of economic arrangements were given visibility, but a closer assessment would indicate and will show clearly that the Gambia's main interest in our relations with Senegal was security related. It was basically security. And since there is no much time, we wouldn't be able to go into the empirical data that we have been able to collect and to confirm this position. So, to have these strong relations with Senegal, I am sure His Excellency, the former Vice President, and many senior personalities here would recall, on the 18th of February, on the day of the Gambia's independence, 3 agreements were signed with Senegal. One was the agreement of cooperation on foreign policy. The second was an agreement of cooperation on matters of security and defense. And 3 was a convention on the joint development of the Gambia River Basin. Now, these agreements were given all sorts of praise, and the government really consider them as a way of bringing the three countries together. But now, bringing the three countries together for what? This is where some of the challenges lay. For the Gambia, it was more of promoting national security in many ways. For Senegal, it was a way of having functional arrangements that would eventually lead to a Senegambian union. Again, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to share the empirical data. Now, during the formative years, a number of activities were embarked upon by the two countries, but unfortunately, they led to some frustration on the part of both countries. The Senegalese did not see enough progress being made on the economic front, while the Gambia felt that even though there wouldn't be enough progress on the economic front, good relations would be needed for the country's security and survival. That alone would enable the Gambia to release its energy for crucial economic activities for the country. Now, just one citation, one quotation that indicated President Jawara's own frustration was when he said, "We look forward to closer relations at all levels with our Senegalese friends. However, I feel compelled to remark that if only they would show a greater and more prompt response to the matters that are from time to time referred to them, cooperation would be that much easier and more fruitful." Now, certainly Senegal was also very much keen on those relations to ensure that Gambia does not become the backyard for destabilization of the country or for illegal activities by perhaps some dissidents. But the Gambia gave Senegal sufficient assurance that this would never happen. And I think since those assurances were given and understood, I think it diluted Senegalese interest in some of the areas of cooperation. That is why they did not push too much for their implementation. Now, viability, as I said, was sought through solid relations or close relations with Senegal, but it was not limited to that. Another area that the Gambia thought its viability would very much benefit from is the participation in multilateral diplomacy. And this explains the haste with which the Gambia has decided to apply for UN membership. It is within this context that the haste with which the Gambia applied for admission to the UN could be appreciated. Besides the 3 agreements signed with Senegal, the second major diplomatic step the Gambia took on 18 February was the application for membership of the United Nations. In his letter of application addressed to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Prime Minister Jawara stated, "The Gambia, having today attained independence, wishes herewith to apply for membership in the United Nations, with all the rights and duties attached thereto." The Security Council Resolution 200, taken at its 1190th meeting in March 1965, recommended the admission of the Gambia to the organization, and the General Assembly approved the Gambia's membership in September 1965, making the Gambia the 116th member of the United Nations. For the Gambian government, admission to the organizations such as the United Nations was part of its attempt at state preservation. This provided the government's raison d'etre and source of its powers. The Gambia also became the 21st member of the Commonwealth upon independence. Admission to the Organization of African Unity was also sought, and granted during the same period, making the country the 37th member of the OAU. Now, these three organizations remain very important for the Gambia, but our membership presented the country with a specific problem, and that was the problem of payment. The high cost of UN membership proved to be a source of concern for the Gambian leaders. On the day of the Gambia's admission to the United Nations, Prime Minister Jawara pointed out to the General Assembly that in terms of size, population, and resources, the Gambia is one of the smallest states to achieve national sovereignty and a place in the international community. This presents very special problems with a country like the Gambia. When a country like the Gambia finds that it is expected to contribute to the expenses of the United Nations on the basis of a minimum contribution, which is out of proportion to its resources. So these were some of the initial challenges. And the Gambia continued to echo these concerns, not only in the UN, but also in the Commonwealth and the OAU. For the Commonwealth and the OAU, the Gambia was able to get a revised assessed contribution, so that the country's contribution to those organizations was reduced, but it could not get the UN to revise its, the country's assessed contribution. Now, the result is that the Gambia did not have a permanent representation at the UN, up to the mid-70s. Financial constraints, the high cost of participation in these things, in these organizations, were advanced by the government as the main reason for our inability to be fully represented in the United Nations. This resulted in the fact that though the country took a position on the various issues before the General Assembly, it was frequently absent from the roll call votes, even on matters of importance to Africa. In 1968, for example, the Gambia was absent during the United Nations vote on Rhodesia, but yet the Gambia government was able to issue a very important statement on Rhodesia, even though the country was absent. So, Excellencies, this is the second area that was opened on the outside world as a way of preserving and ensuring the Gambia's viability. That's membership in international organization. The third area, as I said, was the economic diplomacy that the Gambia embarked upon immediately after independence. And again, the empirical data that is available shows that up to 1967, United Kingdom provided the bulk of funding for the Gambia, and perhaps some good economic performance led to the UK withdrawing some of those support, but much of it was based on the United Kingdom. And links with UK, Europe, as well as religious affinity with Middle East bolstered the government's efforts in mobilizing assistance from these regions. Hopefully, we should be able to share the data for us to see the type of support and the importance of international support to the Gambia throughout the period. If you look at the recurrent budget and the development budget, you would see the importance of development support that the international community has provided to the Gambia, particularly for the development vote. And the Honorable former Vice President is here, who was also the Minister of Finance, and he would confirm this. Now, the economic diplomacy was not at all costs. We all recall, as the Honorable former Vice President reminded us, the Gambia breaking relations with Libya in 1980, when it became clear that relations with Libya were problematic, not only for the Gambia, certainly, but for a number of West African countries. And at that time, the GPTC was already established, and some support was coming from Libya. But despite all that, the Gambia government, President Jawara, felt that Libya was a threat to our security, not only to national security, but to regime security, and as a result, relations were broken off. So here again, we have the economic objectives being pursued alongside the security objectives. Excellencies, very briefly, now we did talk about the Gambia's participation and the difficulties of paying or contributing to the running of some of these institutions because of the assessed contribution that the Gambian authorities found to be a bit high. But once the government took its position firmly in some of these countries, some of these organizations, in the Commonwealth particularly and in the OAU, there we see Jawara's role as a unifier. It would be recalled that the white minority rule was a challenge on the continent, particularly in Southern Africa. Rhodesia in particular was a problem within the Commonwealth, and the OAU had taken initiatives to withdraw from the Commonwealth, some members of the OAU, to withdraw from the Commonwealth if the conditions they had put in place were not fulfilled by the UK. Again, the unilateral declaration of independence of Smith and the international response, including the response of the United Nations General Assembly, are well documented. But look at how President Jawara has treated that very delicate matter. The problem of Rhodesia, which dominated the Commonwealth Conference in 1965, 1966, and 1967, consisted not what attitude should be taken, but what action should be taken. Most African states favored the use of force to dislodge the Smith regime, but Britain opposed this option. This is why a number of African countries felt it important and necessary to break up relations with the United Kingdom if their conditions were not met. Now, so Dawda's response was, the Gambia remains solidly and unequivocally behind any move which aims at putting an end to the illegal regime in Rhodesia and establishing majority rule. The Gambia government does not, however, see how this can be achieved by severing relations with Great Britain at this critical stage. To do so would be to shut the door against direct negotiations with the country which is still primarily responsible for the affairs of Rhodesia. Similarly, the Gambian government cannot see how withdrawing from the Commonwealth would hasten the solution to the Rhodesian problems. So this is the position of President Jawara. So while he is supporting independence for some of these countries, he felt some of the radical moves that were being preached were not necessary because he believed in the dialogue, and that could have been broken if members had withdrawn from the Commonwealth. Well, another take is, yes, as a country, we need to be self-serving sometimes because we are talking about it at a time, about a period when much of the recurrent support, or support to the recurrent expenditure was coming from UK. So breaking ties at that time was not I don't think that would have been clever. Now, although the African countries took that decision, only 9 out of the 36 members of the OAU broke off relations with the UK. Although the problem of Rhodesia was not solved until 1980, the rift created in the Commonwealth over the question disappeared by 1969. In that year, the Commonwealth Conference saw a massive turnout of African leaders who had withdrawn their threat to leave the organization. Much of the outreach was undertaken by President Jawara. Now, the OAU too had similar problems, and it was paralyzed by a series of political crises. A quarrel between Ghana's Nkrumah and several states of the Organisation Commune Africaine et Malgache, OCAM, over Ghana's alleged infringement of neighboring territories. Nkrumah's maximalist position that African unity meant continental union government, and the disagreement of several mainly OCAM members with this view, which they considered to be part of Ghana's territorial ambitions. The divergence led several states to advocate a boycott of OAU summit, scheduled to take place in Accra in September 1965. Here again, Dawda went around to preach for solidarity, to preach for unity. As a result, the threat to boycott the common OAU summit in Accra were not carried out. The summit took place in Accra in October 1965, and Jawara, as head of the newest member state, was called upon to reply to Nkrumah's opening speech. There was no boycott. So again, this is Jawara, the unifier. Jawara, the peacemaker. This was in full display in the 1980s, in the early 1980s. We all recall, at least some of us could now recall, in the some events in the 80s. During the 80s, the Gambia's policy in West Africa was marked by the growing concern about the political problems that compounded the economic problems of the region. These problems assumed alarming proportion during the latter half of the 1980s. Relations between the Gambia and Senegal left much to be desired following the disintegration of the Senegambian Confederation. Senegal and Mauritania broke off relations. Tuareg rebels were active in both Mali and Niger, and political unrest and student demonstrations became commonplace in Ivory Coast, in Cote d'Ivoire. Civil, religious, and student uprisings were shaking the very foundation of Babangida's military regime in Nigeria. But it was the Liberian Civil War, which broke out in 1989, that posed the greatest threat to peace and security of the region. Let me sum up quickly. This happened when Jawara was the chair of ECOWAS. There is a protocol relating to mediation, peacekeeping, peace resolution, management, and resolution of conflicts. Now, this became Jawara's preoccupation, to ensure that ECOWAS works to bring peace to Liberia, because the insecurity in that country threatened the whole region. First, the Standing Mediation Committee had several meetings here. Liberian factions had several meetings here. And the summit itself, the authority itself, had its meetings under Jawara's chairmanship. And it was under Jawara's chairmanship in Bamako when a peace agreement was reached in Liberia. I'm summarizing this incident in the interest of time, but this is the role that Jawara played. And it was during this period, under President Jawara's leadership, that ECOWAS decided to send its first peace support mission to any country. So when we have today an ECOWAS mission, or even before today, we had the ECOWAS mission in Sierra Leone. We have the ECOWAS mission here in the Gambia. We have the ECOWAS mission in Guinea-Bissau. And as I speak, we are working on an ECOWAS mission for Sierra Leone. The foundation was laid by Dawda. It was laid during Dawda's leadership of ECOWAS. And we need to recognize this. And Excellencies, Dawda cannot be, you can't talk about Dawda without talking about the human rights defender, the Democrat. And again, here I'm just summarizing. Certainly, with independence, a number of African countries became members of the United Nations and then members of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But the institutionalization of human rights did not take place in those early days. It was not until 1979 that the question of human rights began to be given greater attention at the continental level. And the Gambia's role in this needs to be emphasized. It was the brutality of Amin's regime in Uganda and the Tanzanian-Ugandan war that compelled the OAU to address itself more seriously to the problem of human rights in Africa. For the first time, an African Declaration on Human Rights was adopted during the OAU Summit Conference in Monrovia in September 1979. Though the proposal of the declaration had several sponsors, those sponsors include Senegal and Mauritius, it has been established that much of the credit for making it a priority issue belongs to the Gambia's president, who runs a model small republic and has placed himself at the forefront of human rights campaign in the continent. Indeed, the Monrovia Conference was followed by a number of activities, a number of events that sought to institutionalize human rights on the continent. And certainly there were some setbacks, and Dawda's response to some of those setbacks again showed the diplomat we had here as a head of state. Dawda said, indeed, we will recall that while the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly more than 30 years ago, the subsidiary conventions on civil, political, economic, and cultural rights were adopted some 20 years later. It took another 10 years before the instruments came to force. However, the Gambia's impatience with the slow pace of the work on the draft charter, that is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, could be felt even though official statements were couched in the most diplomatic manner. For example, President Jawara told the Freetown Summit that our initial success should not inhibit the expeditious adoption of an African Charter on Human and People's Rights. That is why the Gambian government, in its unflinching determination to contribute effectively to the establishment of an African machinery that will promote the respect for and protection of human and people's rights, has requested to host the second ministerial meeting on the draft charter. The second ministerial meeting on the draft charter was convened in Banjul in January 1981, and the ministers proposed to the heads of state and the government that the adoption of to adopt the charter and named it a Banjul Charter. The charter was unanimously adopted during the summit of the OAU heads of state and government in Nairobi in 1981. It came into force in October 1986 after ratification by a simple majority of OAU member states. The Gambia ratified the charter in June 1983 and proposed to host the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The country's candidature met little challenge. Thus, when the decision to have the commission outside the headquarters of the OAU was taken, Banjul was unanimously chosen as the most favorable site. The naming of the African Human and People's Rights Charter after Banjul and the establishment of both the African Human Rights Commission and the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies in the Gambia indicate the amount of value entrepreneurial activities that the country's human rights activism won her. As President Kenneth Kaunda recognized, Addis Ababa is synonymous with the OAU. Banjul is synonymous with the promotion and protection of human rights in Africa. And I quote. One last incident to show the independence, the independent-mindedness of Dawda. We all recall, at least through secondary material, most of us would recall, that the white minority regimes in Southern Africa were confronted with nationalist movements. Now, in one country, you had more than one guerrilla or nationalist movement that were fighting for the independence. Now, some of these movements were not only fighting the white minority administrations, but they had some conflict among themselves. As a result, they went to seek recognition across the continent and around the world. For President Jawara, automatic recognition was given to only two. That was SWAPO and ANC. These were the only freedom fighters President Jawara gave recognition to. The others, he recognized their presence, but he did not give any of them a recognition as the sole representative of their people until they fulfill certain conditions. And one condition was territorial authority over territory, control of the territory, and the vote from the population. So as a result, it was only after the elections in both Zimbabwe and Angola that President Jawara recognized the MPLA and then the ZANU-PF of Zimbabwe. So despite the fact that a number of African countries, almost 2/3, had already recognized those countries, President Jawara believed to be recognized, you need to have control over a territory. And you must exercise sovereignty over the whole territory to be able to be recognized as the sole representative of your people. And I believe the senior officials would recall the number of visits that these independence movements paid to the Gambia. They were received but not recognized as the sole representatives of their countries. So this shows that President Jawara was a unifier, a peacemaker, but also very independent-minded. And this, as Gambians, we must recognize. Now, to conclude, Excellencies, we have seen the various episodes that have painted or portrayed President Jawara as a leader, a unifier, a peacemaker, a pragmatist, very rational. And what we have seen is our foreign policy, our foreign relations focused on security, on socioeconomic development. But there is this third one, which is norm promotion, promoting principles and norms such as human rights and democracy, which President Jawara has devoted a lot of attention to. Now, when we first did the study, we call it prestige. We said this is an area where countries want to have prestige. So in addition to economy and security, they also push for regime and national prestige. But perhaps there is a better wording for that. But let us all think for once, and that is my concluding remark. Any foreign policy incident of Australia, of the US, of any country that cannot fit in these three categories. Any foreign policy incident. If it is not security, if it is not socioeconomic development, if it is not norm promotion or prestige, if there is any foreign policy incident that you cannot just put in this pigeonhole, we'll be glad to hear. Now, while you think about it, the conclusion we can draw from this is that all countries pursue the same foreign policy objectives. Three foreign policy objectives: security, socioeconomic development, and norm promotion or prestige development. When I did this study 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, I was hoping that by now it would have been disproven. It would have been really dismantled. But so far, these are the three positions. These are the positions I've held. And this is what Sadauda's foreign policy, or Gambia's foreign policy during Jawara's time has taught us. And it has shown that there is no country, small or large, that doesn't have a foreign policy. Let us stop telling ourselves we don't have a foreign policy. We do have. We may not have it documented. We may not have it documented as such, but we pursue the same foreign policy objectives with the United States of America. It is just what we do and how we do it which matter. And thanks to Dawda Jawara. Thank you.
Sadauda's, the diplomat, cannot be described better in any given circumstance. Dr. Omar Alieu Touray, Kairaba is very grateful and thankful to you for delivering this wonderful speech, wonderful lecture on Dawda, the diplomat. We have here the representative of the father of the nation, the president, His Excellency Adama Barrow, in the person of the Honorable Minister, Dawda Jallow, and we would give him the opportunity to say a few words also on his own behalf and on behalf of the President on their thoughts about Dawda and Kairaba. Thank you.
Good evening. If you insist, I will. I'm sitting in for the President, but my instruction was to go and listen in. But Tal will tell you, we are taught to be ready to say something on your feet anytime. Your Excellency, former Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, Your Excellency, the former First Lady,
Your Excellency, the President of the ECOWAS Commission, Right Honorable former National Assembly member on the High Table, Council Tal, Dr. Obi, and all the distinguished Gambians that are in the audience. Quite a lot of you are here. We cannot even begin to list you. On behalf of His Excellency, the President, we thank Kairakulo for this laudable initiative to keep alive the legacies of the first President of the Republic of the Gambia, who is not an ordinary person in the Gambian history. When I looked at the Banjul Declaration that is behind us, as a lawyer, I reminded myself that he started towards the last days of his rule to implement his belief on environmental matters. And one evidence that I found from my field, that's the law area, he removed the environment, which was a unit under the Ministry of Health. I think his former cabinet ministers are here. And in 1994, precisely May in 1994, he assented to the current National Environmental Management Act. He did not only create the National Environment Agency as we know it today, Sir Dawda, but in that legislation, he created an environmental council, which he is to chair as the president. Normally, presidents don't chair boards or governing councils, but I think it goes to show how much he is attached to environmental matters. Unfortunately, he assented to that legislation in May 1994, and we all know 2 months after what happened. He never get to chair a single meeting of the National Environmental Council. 22 years after his rule, during the period of the former president, for 22 years, National Environmental Management Council never met. Not even once. The current president revived the National Environment Management Council, and they met even last month. And that is the 3rd meeting during President Barrow's time. For 22 years they've not met, but that's the 3rd meeting within the last 7 or 8 years of President Barrow. President Barrow is a great friend of the Sir Dawda family, even when Sir Dawda himself was alive, and this continues to date. One testimony of that is the recent legislation that we passed into law for the benefits of former presidents. I'm glad to inform you publicly, President Barrow has approved for those benefits to start with the widow of Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. He approved it, and as we speak, instructions have been conveyed to PMO and the National Treasury for the benefits to start flowing to her. So, to the organizers, we are with you in this journey, and I can assure you President Barrow's full support to your initiatives, and he will definitely positively respond anytime you called on him in one way or the other. Thank you very much.
Quite a number of distinguished guests in this audience, people who are not only distinguished in their respective careers, but people who have had personal experiences working with Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara. And my chairman has graciously asked me to ask some of you to speak about Sir Dawda in your experience for maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Excellency Madam Touray Jawara, Honorable Excellency Bakary Darboe, Ambassador Ramsia Diab, my good brother, Ecowas President, Honorable Dawda Jallo, Metal Almami, Dr. Obi. I feel very humbled to be given this task to say a few words. I know it's at the behest of my Khalifa, Alhaji Ibumane, on instructions to Almami Tal. But I'll take the honor and make it very brief. I recall very vividly, and Alhaji, His Excellency Bakary Darboe is here to attest to what I'm going to say. When we had the Economic Recovery Program, the ERP was developed on several parameters, and it was a very far-reaching economic recovery program, the ERP, and it said that we need to flow the dalasi, we need to remove price controls, we need to retrench the civil service. I was very young at the time. I think I was the youngest economist in the room. And we went to Dawda. And I think Bakary Darboe, Malcolm McPherson, Abdinjai, and others made a very good presentation of what the structural adjustment program entailed. He listened attentively and looked at everybody in the eye and said, wow, these measures are very far-reaching. And everybody was quiet. He said, you want me to flow the dialysis? Everybody was quiet. You want me to liberalize trade? You want me to divest of public enterprises? You want me to retrench the civil service? And everybody was quiet. He said, well, do we have a choice? Everybody was quiet. He said, what do you call it? And they said, it's called the Structural Adjustment Program, Economic Recovery Program. He said, well, since we don't have a choice, and it's called Structural Adjustment Program, we either adjust or we bust. And adjust we did. Gambia became the first country to qualify under Article 8 of the IMF, and the dalasi became convertible currency. In those days, even if you had the money, you were not able to access rice unless you had a direct line to Kabajalo or Jeffrey Rena or Musa Drame, because rice was not available. To the extent that I recall, people were basically scrambling for rice, and this old woman had a baby on her back. And because of the pushing and pulling, the young girl fainted. It was that bad. And with the Article 9, that scenario changed. In those days, of course, we had Gamtel. And a SIM card was costing $1,000. And if you did not know Bakary Njai, you would not have a SIM card. And the queue to get a SIM card was almost 6 months. We opened up, today you learn at the airport, everybody gives you a SIM card free of cost. Right. Fast forward, he said, when we said the divestiture program, that government has no business, that government should not be in the business of buying rice and cement. And NTC was divested. And when the case was made, the price of rice and cement became available and accessible and affordable. And his take was, it is not the business of government to be in business. That was very fundamental. Going forward, during that time, we had direct flights from the Gambia to the UK. He was a good friend of Sir Alex Thompson. So British Caledonian was flying into Gambia. When British Californian was taken over by British Airways, he had the same arrangement with British Airways. When British Airways gave notice that they were going to stop flights into Gambia, he called us into his office with Sarah Jangha and gave us marching orders, myself, Fode Jajusi, Ousseynou Ndiaye, Salifou Diallo, and I think York Cham, and say we cannot afford not to have a direct flight to the Gambia from Europe because we depend on tourism. So your instructions are go to Brussels and negotiate with Sabina. It was not called Brussels Airlines then, it was called Sabina. We got there for 48 hours and also Baba Jan. Within 48 hours, we were able to negotiate with Sabina, and immediately British Airways stopped flying. Sabina started flying into the Gambia, and that is what we have today, which we have today with Brussels Airlines continue to fly. Now, the most important, and this is interesting for ECOWAS, he called us into his office and said, you know, I'm the longest serving president in ECOWAS, but we have never hosted ECOWAS. And therefore, I don't have the liberty of being the chairman of ECOWAS Commission. And the reason is simple. He said, we have not hosted because we don't have a 5-star hotel. What can we do about this? We were called, I think Bakary Bunja Darboe, I believe, was Minister of Finance at the time, or Vice President. We were given marching orders. Sarah Janga could not travel. Balagay could not travel. I was tasked with Alieu Touray, late Alieu Touray, to negotiate a 5-star hotel. We left here, flew into Norway with Selma Sande. It was freezing cold. We negotiated with Selma Sande a turnkey contract to build the Kairaba Beach Hotel and fully furnished. We negotiated that, and we did a government guarantee. We turned around and went to GIEC and negotiated GIEC guarantee. There was a funding gap. We then flew into Germany to DEG and negotiated, a grant from, a funding arrangement with GIEC, with DEG. There was still a funding gap. Ambassador Yusufaka is here, he was at the PAU. He can attest to what I'm saying. We went to Netherlands and negotiated with FMO. And we got a turnkey contract. And the contract was that the hotel will be built to a 5-star standard with all the facilities within a period of 18 months. And that was successfully done. To the extent that we had a surplus, and that surplus was used to build the VIP lounge at the airport. But the interesting part is, Kairaba was supposed to be an extension of Senegambia. And the name Senegambia was also derived from Sir Dawda through Gaba Jahumpa. That's how the name came. So we did not want to have it Senegambia. So we went to his office, and I have the pictures to prove this, and said, we have decided that Gambia is synonymous with peace. So we want to call this hotel the Kaira Hotel. He looked at us very attentively and said, yes, you are very right. Kaira means peace. But in Mandinka, Kairaba means bigger peace. So why don't you call it Kairaba? And suddenly, we agreed that Kairaba was a more befitting name. And then, of course, we all remember Tesito and his farm. So he was leadership by example. Every time he gets off work, he goes to his farm and will produce whatever was required for this country. And he was very passionate about cattle. Suleiman Boop, the veterinary profession. He was the first veterinary doctor. The second was Walindao. The third is my good brother, my big brother, Dr. Alieu Touray. The fourth was my blood brother, Dr. Omar Touray. So I think it's befitting that the University of the Gambia should have a school of veterinary medicine named after him. And it should be linked directly to Cornell University. In Cornell University today, we have Dr. Siga Jany, Dr. Jara Jany, and Professor Jara Jany. And Sir Dawda visited Cornell University at the time that Musa Amenga was a student at Cornell. And Cornell is a household name in terms of veterinary medicine. So you can do a very simple twinning arrangement.
But I will want to associate myself very much with this event, particularly the organization Kairaba Club, what they are trying to do. This is a weakness in our country. We don't sing the heroes, our heroes. Other people we let other people sing it. And this is a disease of today. Because in the past, that was one of the main roles of the griot, to ensure that those who have done outstanding deeds are retained in the minds of the people. And you are reminded at christening ceremonies, you are reminded at every event. And the essence of that is to give an ambition to others to emulate what he has done. Sir Dawda was really an outstanding leader who loved his country and whose legacy we need to sing, whose legacy we need to project to the world. I don't want to talk about what he has done in the country. I think that has been addressed more than adequately by Dr. Touray and also others who intervened. Basically, he's not only a man for the Gambia. Sir Dawda was beyond the country Gambia. And you recognize that when you travel with him to meetings. I had the opportunity, and I thank God for that, but I also thank him, to interact with him when I was at the intermediate cadre of the service. I've traveled with him on a boat during the Meet the Farmers tour. I've traveled with him to international conferences. And I had the opportunity also to work not only in the Foreign Service, but also to work in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. That was the home of the National Environment Agency. In fact, it was at the Ministry of Health. Then it was moved to the Ministry of Natural Resources. And it re-echoes or emphasizes the point you made. That is his commitment to environmental issues. I mean, when we go to, I remember we went to the IUCN meeting. The Gambia was almost the star at that meeting. Everybody knows about the Gambia. Everybody knows about Sir Dawda. Everybody knows the good work. And what they will tell you is, keep on the good work. Banjul Declaration was prepared, I can say, 20 years before people became aware of the relevance and importance of providing this. That insight we owe to Sir Dawda. And as one of the speakers said about his lecturer, I think Dr. Touray, he was a scientist. And some of this thinking, this farsightedness and planning, come to him naturally. Sir Dawda was not only involved in the international scene on the wider scale. Even in our sub-region, he did a lot. Sir Dawda was the only president at some point in our history, of the sub-region, who was able to talk to Leopold Sedar Senghor. He spoke to Sékou Touré, and these are two people who were insulting every day in the evening on their radio stations. Senghor, the Radio Senegal, will insult Guinea and Sékou Touré, and in the evening Sékou Touré will insult Senegal, President Senghor, and abat la révolution, and he will say, pray pour la révolution. He was also the one who talked with Ofid Boigny. So, and it was through that effort that he was able to bring together some of the effort that is required in developing our sub-region. We formed the OMVG. OMVG was formed by two countries, Gambia and Senegal. But you cannot talk about a river basin organization when 50% or 30% lies in another country. That's not a member. And it was difficult. Sir Dawda took up the thing to talk to Sékou Touré, convince him that he should be part of it. Of course, Sékou Touré also had his requirements, which was, we must bring Guinea-Bissau along, because they have a river, the Kayanga-Geba and Korubal rivers, they should also be part of it. And I say this to show that he's a real diplomat and his flexibility. In fact, at that meeting where we formalized this decision, it was former Vice President Bakary Darboe who was sitting in for him at that meeting, because Dawda himself was the chairman of the meeting. And you always feel happy at these meetings at the highest level when you hear President Jawara intervene sensibly, but trying to bring positions together, trying to bring out a common position that will make the organization move forward. These are demonstrated at various levels. At the environmental level, as I said, we had the ministry, but Dawda was so committed on these environmental issues that he took all the time to go to the meeting in the Rio conference that looked at all the 3 conferences. And I show you, every evening, we have to brief him. You have to explain what has been going on, what is the position about this place, and what is Gambia's position. And I want to tell you that the Convention on Desertification, which was finally approved, really came about because Dawda said we should accept a certain position, because the African countries didn't want to. We spoke with the Americans, and the Americans said, look, this desertification is everywhere. So we cannot make it an issue as if it is peculiar to only. So we talked, and in the end agreed that, well, we'll make it particularly Africa. And if you look at the convention, it says, and it mentions particularly in Africa. This was something we cleared with Dawda, and he accepted. He said, look, if this will make it work, go and accept that. Talk to your colleagues, and they should accept this. And we spoke to them, he accepted. He was realistic. He was realistic when it comes to resources. He had the Gambian people at heart, and he knew their limits. We could have opened 10 embassies, but you talk to him about opening embassies, you will not be able to finish all the questions he'll ask you, because he knows the expense, the cost of running embassies. So we had a limited embassy representations, which we supplement by multiple accreditation. But he was very, very, how would I say, very simple, because when we travel with him, Lady Mama Chilel is there. When we do travel, really, you see the president up and you see yourself down, but he always wants to make you feel at ease. We are always made feel at ease. If you have to eat all together, it is really as a family. So he has a very good heart. He has a feeling for the Gambia. And really, this is something I want to witness. There are many other things, but the principal talk today is about a diplomat, which I think Dr. Touray had made justice to. But he was a great man, and we need to honor him. Thank you.
I know there are many people in this audience who would like to say something about Dawda and their experiences with him. But can we now ask Professor Sen to take the scene and make his own contribution?
Recognize as well as greet the distinguished panelists for their brilliant contributions, and in particular Dr. Sise and Touray. Yeah, I want to convert him into, but really it was quite good. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I'd like to also greet all those distinguished attendants for this very important occasion. I did not know Dawda personally. I got to meet Dawda in the late 80s after he had been, 90s actually, after he had been ousted. I had the singular privilege of inviting him to Miami University in Ohio, where I was teaching at the time. I'm now retired. And he stayed with us for about 4 days, in which he gave brilliant lectures on democracy on human rights, African politics. And what was distinguishable about Sir Dawda was his humility, his accessibility, and his willingness to discuss global affairs with students at the university. I visited him in the UK prior to him visiting Miami University in the late 90s. And I was overwhelmed by his caliber, by his simplicity, and his humility. He was not somebody who would show off. He was somebody who actually would not show off. He has so many things, so many talents, but he was not somebody who could or who would show off in any regard. The students loved him. The faculty respected him when he came to Miami University. And it is an occasion that I still remember as one of the highlights of my career as a political scientist in the US. These gentlemen know him better. I had the occasion of meeting him maybe just for a few times. I also wrote on Sir Dawda. I wrote a book chapter on African politicians, and had the occasion of using the material I received from him in addition to other things, and wrote a piece on him. He's a remarkable person. He combined so many qualities that were so remarkable, and yet he was so humble. That was a distinguishing element of Sir Dawda. Thank you so much.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I now have the singular honor of inviting the Deputy Chairperson of Kairaba and the person of Our Excellency, former Ambassador to Malaysia, Ramzia Diab, to give the closing remarks and the vote of thanks.
Invitees, I'll start with His Excellency, the former Vice President, Mr. Bakary Bunja Darboe, His Excellency, Dr. Alieu Touray, President of the Ecowas Commission, Honorable Minister of Justice, Attorney General, Mr. Jallo, our able chairperson, Mr. Lawyer Almami Funding Tal, and also Dr. Obi, and all other members of trustees, distinguished ambassadors, former ministers, and all distinguished personalities who have graced this occasion in honor of Sir Dawda. Sir Dawda's legacy is something we will sit here and talk about the whole night, and it won't end. But I am so pleased that you were all able to turn up and listen to this important lecture, and I wish I could see the Generation Z, as they call them, to learn more about Sir Dawda. I was expecting to see most of the university students, because our aim in Kairaba is to make sure that we distribute this Banjul Declaration to all the schools in the Gambia, because Jawara's legacy is something that will never die. So we want all the schools to continue to know about this important personality. I also thank, I would not go without thanking personally the representatives of the Chinese ambassador. I would want to say that China was one of our earliest diplomats in the Gambia. I remember when I was young and in school, we had the agricultural support from China, and we used to call their rice the Chinese rice, and also the help with the stadium. So thank you very much and for your contribution, and still contributing towards the development of the Gambia. I would also like to acknowledge my former permanent secretary when I was ambassador, Madame Touray, who always had an ear for us. And as a woman of substance, I want her to be recognized today, that we appreciate her service that was rendered to us. A woman after my own heart. Today, Your Excellencies, my task this evening is extremely very easy, as to have to thank you for making this day possible. The rich leadership legacy of Sir Dawda is shining bright in the centenary year of his birth. We have learned a lot from what the distinguished personalities have said here, especially Dr. Touray. And Dr. Touray, we are so much honored that you have opened this door for us as the first lecture in a series of lectures that we will be having as Kaira Klo. We want this thing to continue, and every year, inshallah, we will be having distinguished personalities to come and talk about Sir Dawda. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I wish to thank very much for gracefully accepting our invitation to deliver the inaugural lecture of the Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara Pan-African Lecture Series. I thank you all. Have a great evening. And Happy New Year in advance.
Islamic microfinance is becoming an increasingly popular mechanism for poverty alleviation, especially for developing countries around the world. This microfinance service adheres to the principles of Islam as a form of social responsibility. Yonna Islamic Microfinance is the Islamic microfinance of choice in the Gambia, trustworthy and reliable. At Yonna Islamic Microfinance, we provide savings products, current accounts, financing products in conformity with Islam. In addition, Yonna Islamic Microfinance also offers local and international remittances, takaful fund, management of zakat, management of awqaf, trading and investment, and building of strategic partnerships to bring financial services to the doorstep of the poor with donor projects, madrasas, youth organizations, women groups, and farmer organizations. Make a choice with Yonna Islamic Microfinance today. For more information on Yonna Islamic Microfinance, call 377-2151 or 9832-151 or visit Yonna head office at Tipa Garage, Bakote, or visit any Yonna branch located countrywide near you.
Ya bari biyo ken kontan batale. Bari natal pour kan bunlo ko jibe.
Ito kontan tale makura. Bari ala ya lonte man kontan de. Makura kana nyina ko teninte belbe tuba dudu la kili ngoto.
Ngoto nyalti kay.
Ngoko di baka to kina njang pour yena dula dala ni tata na dula to makura ala ya long njuso malla ama hani futa dula din anu birite loro commencé woni bitema ama hani me
no ama me to nyalom
ke bara fonye mune muy la kulloti
ndela kullu balu woldi
balu ha way fo balu ko loro fanankel
ikal loro fanankele
nyin kunne soniata ta www.baluwo.com anim baluwo isela bulloran jorangol be sang anila kudula asatare mambata jorangol membu ko sementol kenyo babarol nil peruol woni nga nyon jamal tabaluwo.com yin jorangol be sang ila dinkira bado adungite batala je anim baluwo ifangole marate la kudula